All right. Well, welcome those who are in the room and those who are online watching tonight. We're continuing in our in-depth delineation, and tonight's class is going to be on a couple of different subjects. The legacy of C.C. Zane, since some of you brought up the name earlier and how smart he was, and so I thought I'd give you a little information about him and where this particular school of thought comes from. And then we're going to move on and look at a particular facet of astrology known as essential dignities, which was a request from Johanna that we cover that in this next series of classes. And it is very, very old and very fascinating approach to understanding the planets and the signs. Here is a quote. Astrology is the science of finding and utilizing the natural potentialities as indicated in the planetary chart at birth. It becomes a religion when it shows the individual how these natural tendencies can and should be utilized for the benefit of all mankind and the furtherance of the purpose of deity. This is a quote from Edward Doane, who was the second president of the Church of Light, becoming president in 1951 after Albert Benjamin's demise.
He was the husband of Doris Chaston.
Yes, he was her second husband, I believe. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
Come grab a seat and some handouts and join us.
And the two Michaels are on.
All right, Mike and Doug, welcome. So, I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about Hermetic astrology. Some of the conversation going on in the room prior to the start of class tonight was about reading different astrological journals and how... Hey, Tina, Shoshona, come and grab seats. You can move them around to suit you if you like. There's an empty chair over here.
All right. I can do that. There's some more chairs there. And there's one over here. Oh, okay.
This one's open.
That one's open. All right. Yes. Thank you.
I'm hoping there's enough handouts for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm giving a little background on Hermetic astrology. And one of the conversations that came up in the room prior to class beginning was basically when you go to study astrology, there are so many different systems of thought out there, so much different information, and every author has a need to be original in some ways, or to, discover the latest key to astrology. As I always like to say, actually repeating from one of my mentors, so many books, so little information. So I strongly recommend to students, you don't have to study my system, even though it is, to me, the preferred method. Find a system and become well versed in it before exploring a lot of different systems. Once you have a good scaffolding in a system, you're in a better position to be able to contrast and compare information, to be able to analyze and scrutinize information, and be able to do enough research to see if every new invention out there or every new theory actually works. So we're actually working from a very specific system in this class called the Hermetic system. And I've been studying it since 1973, though I started studying astrology in 1968 and spent about 6 years going through various other circles of thought before settling on this system. So I'm going to give you a little information here. Albert Benjamin, who was also known as C.C. Sane, was perhaps the most prolific astrological author in the first half of the 20th century. Between the years of 1914 to 1951, he wrote thousands of articles and numerous books. Under his name, Albert Benjamin, he wrote Astrological Lore of All Ages, Beginner's Horoscope Maker and Reader, How to Select a Vocation, Body Disease and Its Stellar Treatment, and many more. There you go. Now, under the aegis of the Brotherhood of Light, or the Church of Light, the Brotherhood of Light was founded in 1918, so we're soon to be 100 years old in 5 more years. And the Church of Light, the Brotherhood of Light, closed its doors and became the Church of Light in 1932. One of the reasons behind that was due to the fact that in Los Angeles County, there were ordinances being passed to prohibit the practice and or teaching of astrology. So
Why?
Well, the reason why is that there were persons living there at that time that, whether it was religious or academic, that felt it should be prevented. It didn't fit in with their worldview.
America.
Yeah, that's America. But we were able to incorporate and get, First Amendment protection. So
We had a church in Mount Vernon, or a metaphysical bookstore. They were protesting up and down the streets, all the people that were in the churches, because they sold books that didn't share their views.
Of course, actually, if you go through American history, there are a lot of very bigoted views on pretty much everything.
Yeah, we killed witches too.
Yeah, I know. Burned
Okay,
witches,
sorry,
African Americans, Native Americans, pretty much anybody who wasn't a white Christian has been looked down upon throughout the entirety of American history.
Yeah.
Well, look what they did to
And
Galileo.
even white Americans were looked down upon during World War I and II. Quite often German people were put into camps. Do you know that? And Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
We have our own share of concentration camps that nobody ever hears about.
Okay, we gotta go on with it.
yeah, I
Sorry, Chris.
have so much information
Sorry.
that if we have a lot of talking in the class,
I'm
we're
sorry.
actually not able to make
Very
it to
sorry.
the end in time. Okay, so using the nom de plume of C.C. Zane, he authored 24 books that comprise the 21 Brotherhood of Light lessons. His astrological system, for which he coined the term Hermetic, combined ancient practice, contemporary mathematics, and an active research department. His work would influence generations of astrological notables. Let's see, we've already gone through that. So, history is, Albert Benjamin was born Benjamin P. Williams to Dr. William J. Williams and Emma Green Williams, 5:55 a.m. on December 12, 1882, near the town of Adel, Iowa. His family remembered this as the year the great comet flashed across the sky.
Does that make him a double Sag? Is he Sag rising as well?
I had his chart up at the beginning of the class, and there's actually, I believe, 5 planets in Sag.
Yes, there are.
So it's
With-
more than
with
double.
the birth time of 5:55 a.m.
Yes, he's Sag rising, Sun in Sag, and I think Mercury and Venus, and
Wow.
perhaps Mars are there as well. Without going back to the very first slide, I don't have it memorized. Now, a natural seer, Benjamin had many psychic experiences in his youth. In the next life, which is the penultimate book in the Brotherhood of Light lessons, Zane describes an incident from his youth where he used his psychic abilities to help locate the missing bodies of 2 drowning victims. Now, in 1900, at age 17, he began studying astrology in an effort to debunk it. He scoffed at the ideas that the planets could influence human affairs. He calculated the charts of family and friends and discovered that astrology worked in spite of its apparent absurdity. Now, certain authors who young Benjamin studied alluded to a mystery school known as the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, and in 1909, at age 28, he attended a meeting of the Brotherhood in Denver, Colorado. In a surprising chain of events, his life would be turned upside down when he was commissioned by the brothers to place their teachings in writing. So, Albert Benjamin was a trained naturalist. He had studied at Iowa State University to become a naturalist. He was instrumental in the founding of a bird sanctuary in Los Angeles County. And these are photos of him in Bryce Canyon and also at the bird sanctuary in LA. Now, in an article written in 1940 by his wife Elizabeth Benjamin, states, he was subjected to much ridicule by his relatives for believing in such bunk, or for trying to get them to believe in it. Here were people close to him who were representatives of the well-educated, who scoffed at the thing which through rigorous experiment he found to be true. He decided that for all he knew, there might be whole continents of phenomena which as yet had not been explored. He would still be a naturalist, but starting with that winter of 1898 to 99, the natural history in which he would specialize and in which he would try to be useful to his fellow man would be the natural history of the realms and forces not commonly explored. Not commonly recognized. So, Benjamin moved to Los Angeles in May of 1915. And on November 11th, 1918, which was Armistice Day, he opened the doors to the public. Now, this was the day that the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor disbanded and the Brotherhood of Light took over that particular teaching mission. So, again, before class started, Andy asked, he changed his name, didn't he? Well, yes. He went, upon moving to Los Angeles, Benjamin P. Williams would later change his name to Albert Benjamin in order to protect his family. Why? His father was a doctor and a deacon in the Disciples of Christ Church, and Benjamin's interest in occultism and astrology were frowned upon within his community. The Brotherhood of Light teachings were written between March 21st, 1914 and February 20th, 1934 by Albert Benjamin under another name. And this was the name of C.C. Zane. Benjamin chose to use a pseudonym for any writings he did for the B of L in order to keep the work separately identified from the writings he published under his own name. Now, C.C. Zane saw himself not so much as the author of original thought, but rather as an amanuensis, or scribe, writing down the information he received from the inner plane brethren. He would subject his impressions to rigorous research and find comparisons available in the contemporary science of his day. So, story goes, in 1932, anti-astrological ordinances were passed in Los Angeles County aimed at prohibiting both the teaching and practice of astrology. It appeared as though political forces would once again drive the Brotherhood underground. The Brotherhood of Light closed its membership roster and became the Church of Light, just prior to the passage of these ordinances. The Church of Light was incorporated under the laws of the state of California on November 2nd, 1932, in order to teach, practice, and disseminate the religion of the stars.
Can you talk about the 9-point plan that's illustrated here?
Sure. This is an old poster which represented the goals of the Church of Light. It had what were called the 4 facts and the 4 freedoms and the universal moral code. So the freedoms that they sought for all humans was freedom of want, freedom of fear, freedom of expression, and freedom of religion. So you can see this winged horse of Pegasus representing the new civilization, and the Aquarian man here, who he looks like a basketball player in this jersey. Hi, how are you? Hi. Come on in and have a seat, and if somebody could hand him some handouts.
So we're kind of understanding freedom from what? Freedom from fear, freedom from censorship?
Well, or freedom of expression and
And,
freedom of religion.
okay, so there
This
was...
is artistic license of the person who drew the poster.
Okay, it was the last one. The others I could understand by freedom from, but the last one, I was wondering if they were reacting against atheism.
They were reacting against the trend in materialistic atheism.
Okay.
Yes.
Or maybe they're saying the freedom to have it either way.
No, that's not what they were saying.
Have or reject it.
Yeah.
But they were saying you can choose any religion you want. They just weren't godless.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Because one can't really study occultism and be atheistic at the same time. I guess one could see there as being,
Agnostic.
yeah,
Yeah.
but agnostic just means without a defined faith rather than a complete disbelief in the divine. Or a question?
The question was asked, did he do his own drawing?
No, these drawings were done by Mildred Schuler, who published a magazine called The Rising Star. So she is the artist. And then the way that they felt that these freedoms could be achieved was learning the facts of astrology. The facts of astrology, if you know your chart, you can overcome want. One doesn't have to live in poverty or great difficulty, because your chart can be the key to determining where you can experience success in life. The fact of extrasensory perception was that if individuals developed their own intuitive abilities, that they could also develop their own relationship with the divine and not necessarily be dependent on intermediaries or intercessors in that field. One could develop while living an awareness of the inner planes and where the soul goes after the dissolution of the physical body. And then the other facts were the facts of induced emotion and directed thinking, which is much more complicated to describe. But if you think of it, induced emotion means how do you create a mood? And directed thinking is how do you keep your thoughts directed on constructive activities rather than where they normally want to wander? How do you set a goal mentally and move towards it? And how do you induce certain moods or feelings so that you're in a more continuous fashion having more elevated moods and emotions? And these were the facts that were being taught in this 9-point plan. So that was the school of practical occultism. And here's another poster from the 30s or early 40s. So all right. In this school, astrology comprised 7 of the 21 Brotherhood of Light lessons. There are 7 courses which are devoted to alchemy, and that's basically the process of transmuting planetary energies. There are 7 courses devoted to magic, which you can think of. We're not teaching people how to, cast spells on others or to wave black cats around their head at midnight at the crossroads. But magic is basically how do you develop your extrasensory perception.
Psychokinesis.
Mm-hmm.
And isn't a lot of it to help use the energies around you to kind of influence things to go the way you want them to?
Exactly. Or in ways that benefit all of mankind.
Yeah, of course.
So in magic, there are 3 gradations, what are called white magic, gray magic, and black magic. Black magic has as its aims injuring another person. Gray magic is what you described, which is using one's psychokinetic powers to attract favorable events to oneself. And white magic is basically when things are being directed towards the benefit of all humanity, where there isn't a selfish goal, but where the goal is selfless in nature. But in gray magic, again, one may be directing their attentions towards a selfish goal, but not with the aim of injuring another person.
So, Christopher, are you basically saying that energy is energy, and it's the way you use it?
Yeah, what is it? It's not what you got, it's how you use it.
Get down.
So, I mean, black magic is really the same as white, because it's all energy, but it's the vibration at which you're using it. Does that make sense?
Well, it
A
uses
lower or
it
higher?
uses similar techniques and rituals. The intention behind it is
It's
different.
definitely right. Is what makes it.
And the vibratory level of the person practicing it is different, because back to the concept of inducing emotion, if you induce the emotion of wanting to hurt another human being or another living creature of any kind, the vibratory level that you're turned in on is something that's very base. When you're inducing an emotion where you want to uplift and aid all of humanity, you're tapping into something very different. So that's part of the difference. So what else do we have here? In the late 1930s, the Church of Light Quarterly was being mailed to 16,000 students, free of charge. Church of Light classes were open to the public on a free will offering basis. During the Great Depression, many persons benefited from this policy who otherwise would be unable to afford to attend classes. Now, C.C. Zane was a unique leader in that he opposed hero worship or any cult-like behavior. He also discouraged members from taking any of his writings on blind belief, but encouraged them to subject them to their own rigorous testing. Church of Light members were given freedom of conscience and encouraged to study as many things about religion, science, and the mysteries as they could, and subsequently draw their own conclusions. Within the first half of the 20th century, these teachings were distributed around the world, and like the writings of Bailey, Blavatsky, Steiner, and Heindel, the works of C.C. Zane have impacted the lives of thousands of students of Western occultism. Elbert had been informed by the Inner Plane brothers that he should have everything completed by 1950. And Elbert Benjamin passed from the physical plane on November 18, 1951. And in accordance with his instructions, he was cremated and there was no public funeral. His legacy is a body of work that is certain to hold place in history of Western spiritual tradition. So that's the background of this particular system. Now, on to what we're going to learn today. Now, in this system, we have what are called two keys that we study. The gold key and the silver key. Now, the gold key is considered to be the written tradition, science, astrology, and it corresponds, gold is the metal that alchemically corresponds to the sun. The silver key corresponds to the oral tradition, of which we consider the tarot or divination to be part of, and that corresponds to the moon. So the moon does not generate light on her own, but is actually a reflection of the sun. So these techniques of the tarot and other divinatory techniques and oral tradition are considered to be reflections of the written law or scripture. The difference in the religion of the stars is the scripture is not written in the holy books, but we consider it to be written upon the starry constellations of the heavens.
Christopher, are those the same keys in the Hierophant card?
I don't know. I know the Brotherhood of Light deck doesn't have that, but in most other decks it is considered the Pope, the Hierophant, and the Vatican seal, which you can see here, also uses gold and silver keys, which are considered to be the keys of St. Peter, who was the first Pope. So let's talk about Hermetic astrology. There are certain techniques in this system that I'm teaching that are very specific to this system. It is a simple system. You may not always think that when we're spouting it off really fast and going through a chart. But it is simple in that it works with 4 factors. But before we get onto that, the 3 techniques that are unique to the system are astrodynes. This is a system of measuring planetary power, harmony, and discord. Hermetic progressions are a very specific system because we combine major or secondary progressions, we combine minor or tertiary progressions, and transits in a system to look at what future events may happen based on someone's chart. And then we also have the process of alchemy, which is not necessarily limited to or unique to the Church of Light, but alchemy in our system is used. We not only want to be able to look at a chart, determine the qualities of a person's character, but also to be able to give them helpful suggestions in terms of how that character can be changed, how that character can be refined so that the individual works towards expressing their best qualities and their most successful qualities. So it's in most systems of astrology where you go to tell somebody something's going to happen to them, that's only as useful to them as you can also give them the means by which to mitigate it if it's a problem that's coming to them. So, we work with 4 factors, and this is what we're going to use repeatedly over these classes. 12 signs of the zodiac, 10 planets, 12 mundane houses, and 10 aspects. And in our readings, we're constantly using these 4 factors, but looking at the various combinations that are created with them in each and every chart. Now, I started to talk about this last week. One of the ways to look at a chart, and this is going to be redundant for some of you who have studied with me before, but I always like to review this because it really ties into what we're going to talk about tonight, which is essential dignities. Each planet, and we consider the sun and moon planets in astrology, whether it's the sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, has its own specific tone. We oftentimes talk about these tones as the urges of that planet, whether it's urges want to express through power or domesticity or intellect or affection or through strife, through religion, through safety, etc., so on and so forth. But each has its very specific tone. Tones are frequencies. And as we talked about last week, the tone of C sounds differently on a piccolo than on a cello. And so what happens is the signs of the zodiac, when we're looking at an astrological chart, we want to think of the signs of the zodiac as each being a different instrument. So the planetary tones have different qualities when they fall in that sign. We also talked last week about the fact that the houses of a chart are like the auditorium. We're inside the auditorium, the music is being played outside. So it's much like a band moving around the outside of our auditorium. Depending on where you're sitting, whether you're by an open door, which receives full volume, whether you're by a window, which gets average volume, or whether you're by the wall, which is muffled or gets feeble energy. The houses in the chart have these distinct abilities to express greater to lesser volumes of planetary expression. The aspects become the musical composition. And with all, the thing about music, we can't make really broad, sweeping, general remarks about what's good music and bad music, because basically it's all about personal taste. It's how do you resonate with certain music? Does it make you feel good? Does it annoy you? When somebody's pulling up in the lane next to you in their car with their speakers blaring and it's boom, 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 how does it make you feel? Well, obviously it makes the person in that vehicle feel good, and that's why they're broadcasting it to the world. Other people could go to a classical symphony or opera and think that, who's tickling the fat lady? So it all depends. Music is a matter of personal taste. But there is music that is actually written in ways where the compositions are harmonious, and or the compositions might be dissonant or discordant. A lot of the Romantic composers, and especially back in the beginning of the 20th century, they were experimenting a lot with dissonant music. So the aspects basically add this quality of either harmony or dissonance to a chart, and they become the actual composition. These are the idiosyncrasies that we read when we're reading an individual's chart. All right. Just for review, because we're going to start talking about this soon. In astrology, we work with 10 planets representing 10 different urges or thought cells. We just glossed over these, but basically, the sun is the power urges, things which have to do with self-esteem, authority, being in charge, being the boss, being significant. The moon, the domestic urges, think nesting and nurturing, the love of one's offspring, the need to create food for survival. Mercury is intellectual, calculations. Mercury is language, the ability to move concepts from the abstract into the more concrete. Venus is social. Social can be friendship or love, but it's that need to connect with others of the same species. We know that there are types of animals which are considered to be gregarious or social. Horses, for example, always live in herds. Horses that live outside the herds oftentimes die because they're social animals. Mars, aggressive urges. These are either the need to be defensive or offensive. Jupiter is the religious urges, the need that we have as humans to have a belief in a higher power, to feel a connectedness to the divine, which takes different forms according to our culture, background, and religion. Saturn governs the safety urges in the soul. This is the need for self-preservation. Once life comes into manifestation, it wants to continue to live. And to do so, it has to protect itself from invading organisms, whether it's something higher up on the food pyramid, or whether it is, something smaller, such as a microorganism that wants to make a host of our body. Uranus is the individualistic urges. This is the need to be unique and different, or in times of great difficulty in societies. What happens in traditional cultures is they oftentimes step outside of traditional taboos and start to embrace a new plant or a new food that previously would not have been eaten. Or there's a new type of religious ritual that is brought into that group by the ritual specialist within that society. Neptune is the utopian urges. Hold on, let me get through this page. And the utopian urges have to do with the ability to dream of a better world. And the world actually does not get better unless there are people out there dreaming of a better world. And lastly, Pluto is the universal welfare. And this is when we move beyond selfishness and we start thinking in terms of the group and the benefit of the group. And this is where we start thinking outside of the individual, but towards what could be clan, tribe, community, state, nation, or the world as a whole, or the universe as a whole. Question, Shoshana?
What I was going to say is that whenever you embrace a new thing, it can turn out either way, good or bad. Like, for example, whenever they started eating potatoes, right? It was considered the devil's root before they started eating it, but it saved thousands of lives due to the fact that they were starving to death. But on the other hand, we also have things like whenever the religion of Christianity came into a lot of new areas and completely destroyed them, or like when we introduced rabbits into Australia, it could destroy it. So,
Yeah,
what do you think
that-
about that?
I think that's very true. We never know when we're doing something new, what the outcome is going to be. The safety urges are those urges that make us use foresight, planning, thinking ahead. What's going to be the end result of this action? Most people do not think or act with their safety urges fully in place. They move out of impulse. And so often when we go to try and correct one ecological disaster that was created, we get to create a secondary ecological disaster. So, yes, but
When I look at Jupiter and Saturn, which used to be those outer planets before the three others came in, it seems, I don't know, I always have looked at them sort of as opposites. That Jupiter is about not just religion, which is a higher realm, but also expansion in all kinds of ways. And that Saturn represents limitation, not just safety, but manifestation. So it's like you can dream it in Neptune, but if you never put it into three-dimensional reality, which is Saturn,
If you
it
learn
limits
it,
it, it makes it real. I mean,
yeah, dreams are, until dreams are made manifest, they're just fantasies. And some people, especially if they're pot smokers, primarily live in the realm of their fantasies, and they don't always make things manifest or concrete. So, there is different degrees of where the mind goes when it's stimulated by other substances, but where outside of those stimulations, it's not always committing itself to manifesting in the world. So think of it though, Saturn is like a clenched fist, and Jupiter is like an open hand. If you want to give something to someone else, it's easier to do so if you open your hand. When you're clinging to a balcony railing for your dear life, you don't want to open your hand.
Exactly.
if you've learned the lessons of Saturn, then you can expand in Jupiter.
Okay.
That's how I've always looked at it, instead of being limited and restricted.
No, I think I came up with the idea that Saturn was a manifestor because Saturn is in my first house in the first planet. So it's like I don't want to fight this all my
Right
life.
there.
It's got to have something
Right,
good.
and when we do alchemy this summer at our conference, Saturn is the base metal. We start with Saturn because Saturn is lead. It's the densest, it's the heaviest, it's the most solid of those metals, and it is the thing that is manifest. Michelle?
Just say a couple more words about Pluto, about how we get from universal welfare
We can,
to the other qualities of Pluto, which are coercion and control.
Well, that's the nature when people are in groups. The Japanese have a saying, which is, the nail which sticks up must be beaten down. And so in societies, and the more traditional the society, the more you will see this in place. And so in certain societies, people feel more comfortable when everyone is like that.
That's true.
Which is why, conservatives oftentimes feel very uncomfortable in a room full of progressives. Or, this is just an example, or vice versa, yes. We tend to want to be around people that think, behave, and act like us, and if they don't, we want to convince them to. And sometimes that includes strong-arming people. And earlier there was discussion of witch burnings and other such things.
Nazi Germany.
These are ways of trying to homogenize society or get everyone uniform and fitting in, and the nail that sticks up gets beaten down. If you're not following the same religion, if you're not eating the same foods, there's got to be something wrong, and we'll make you fit in. And that's the other side of Pluto. Pluto is the drastic planet. If you look at Pluto in nature, Pluto almost appears like a binary planet, because Pluto and its satellite, the satellite Chiron, are basically, the satellite's not necessarily rotating around Pluto. They're rotating around a fixed center. So Pluto has these qualities of duality. It can be the most spiritualizing and bringing people together into cooperative action for the welfare of the group. Or it can work the other way, of the coercive action, or trying to compel others to fit in. And usually when you're on the end of being compelled, it's very uncomfortable. Those who are compelling generally revel in that particular process. We call them bullies.
Right.
Pluto being the god of the underworld and death, how does that fit in with this universal welfare?
Pluto was also the god that was in charge of the underground wealth.
That's what I was going to say. His name was Dispater, or the father of all wealth. So when in the Greek mythologies, when the gods divided things up, the three brothers were Zeus, Pluto, and Poseidon. Zeus took over the heavens, which included Mount Olympus. Poseidon got the oceans, and Pluto, or Hades, received the earth and all of the terrestrial treasures. So we think of him just as the lord of the underworld and death, but he was also connected to those treasures which are hidden. And I think the universal welfare part of Pluto is when we are able to descend. Sometimes it's in through the dark space, or through the death is sometimes dying to our own ego. Is when we're actually able to motivate ourselves, not just for personal gain, but where we're looking at the way if we benefit, is everyone benefiting?
So the underneath part of the earth and the earth, but also the internal depth of ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah. Which sometimes looks like the dark place. So, planets in signs. We touched on this last week, but what I wanted to talk about tonight was one method by which we interpret the chart is we are placing the planets in the sign of the zodiac, and we're discussing or describing their behavior there. Much like the way that musical tones sound differently to our ear, planets express their energies differently depending on the sign they are in. The signs, or sounding boards, can allow for harmonious or discordant expressions of the planet's energies. So the harmony or discord in a chart is not just dependent on aspects. It can also be dependent on placement in the chart. Some planets express better in some signs and not so great in others, and that's what we're talking about tonight. How do we apply this technique to reading a chart? All right, where are we? Zane says,
No, we're going to the first three questions.
Thank you. The first requisite for judging any horoscope, natal, stellar diagnosis, mundane, weather, or horary, is to know the particular tone or rate of vibration radiated by each of the planets, and what the observed effects of these vibrations upon life. Just as the colors, musical tones, etc. depend upon electromagnetic wavelengths, or wavelengths of physical substance, so each planet radiates a given wavelength and frequency in astral substance, which we call its tone. The effects of each planetary tone is given in chapter 3, blah, blah, blah.
So what's meant by stellar diagnosis
Yeah.
and weather?
Okay, there is a branch of astrology known as stellar diagnosis or stellar healing, and that's when we look at the chart specifically in terms of the inner plane, outer plane relationship, the disharmonies in the soul as they express through dis-ease in the body. It's a way which we do diagnosis, and it's also a method of healing. By knowing where the discords are in the chart, there is a way of injecting planetary energy, tone, color into that affected area, the corresponding zone, or what you might call chakra in the body.
Okay, thank you. And the weather?
And weather is, in weather predicting, I have studied this, but it isn't something I practice, because I actually find the guys on TV do about as good of a job, which is not so great.
You don't have to practice it too much in New Mexico, because it's the same weather every day from the time you get up till when you go to bed.
Tom, usually we say if you don't like the weather, stick around an hour.
There are people who associate astrological phenomena with volcanoes and hurricanes and...
So is that kind of...
Right, this is less, that can be done. We're looking at it more from how useful is it to the farmer, using the sun cycle charts for...
planting?
No, for determining heat, using the Mercury cycle charts for determining wind, and the lunar charts, each new moon is used to determine moisture.
So that wouldn't relate to when you plant certain types of things?
Well, that's more electional. That would come under electional, which is kind of a branch of orrery.
Okay.
You know, like the almanac.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like an almanac, yeah.
They were
Although the
heavily
lunar
used.
cycles can affect things like tidal waves.
Yeah.
What's horary? I've always heard...
Orrery, the word orrery, or horary,
It's predictive.
have you heard, do you know what a horologist is?
No.
It's somebody who works on clocks. So in that is the word hour. It's from where we get our word hour, is from oral. And so an orrery chart is, in a sense, an hourly chart. An orrery chart is a chart that is cast for the birth of a question. So there are astrologers that actually specialize in one branch of astrology. This is very big in the United Kingdom, where people will go and they'll say, you know, such and such is missing from my home. Was it stolen? Or, you know, will they go through with the wedding? Or should I get involved in this real estate deal? And a chart is cast for the moment that idea becomes clear, and the factors in the chart are read. And there are very specific rules that relate to orrery astrology.
I do that.
Okay. It's almost like psychic work in some way.
You know, it is, only you're working with astrology. The symbols from which you're pulling your information are from astrology. I knew someone who's now deceased, but she worked a lot. She was an incredible orrery astrologer. And in Colorado, she worked a lot with detectives.
Yeah.
She was frequently, you know, pointing them in the right direction to find the missing body.
So the time is based on when they ask the question?
Right, because
Okay.
when that question formulates in your mind, it's
It's
being
when-
given birth.
Okay.
Do you
gotcha.
think maybe psychics are just people who are a little bit more in tune with the stars subconsciously?
Possibly, but I think it's more complicated than that and would require a longer answer than I want to give now. I think that we have equivalent soul senses, just as we have physical senses of sight, hearing, taste, scent, touch. We also have soul senses that have equivalencies. And so they are, just as you may have different senses pronounced physically. Some people have very sensitive sense of touch, or I may have a very sensitive sense of smell. Others might be able to hear higher and lower frequencies than others. Different people have different soul senses are pronounced. This is why not all psychics get their information in the same way. And that's why, some people will clutch onto an object and do psychometry, and they get it through a psychic sense of feeling. Other people have clairaudience. They actually hear words being spoken. Some people have clairvoyance. They see visions or they see events either happening at a distance or happening at a distance forwards or backwards in time.
Quite often clairvoyants will dream it too.
Right. So, and the others are just like waking dreams. So it's a little more complex than that. All right, the second, did I do the last? No, we didn't. All right, of the 10 planets, only 4 are harmonious or discordant due to their own nature. Venus is harmonious, adding equal to 1/4 the power of each aspect it makes. Mars is discordant, adding discord equal to the 1/4 of the power of each aspect it makes. Jupiter, the major benefic, adds harmony, 1/2 the power of each aspect. Through those curtains, the door, straight through there. Make yourself at home. Saturn, the major malefic, adds discord, 1/2 the power of each aspect it makes. The other 6 planets are neutral insofar as harmony or discord is concerned. Their harmony or discord being determined only by their essential dignity and the aspects they form.
Now, is this percentage based on the astrodynes, but I don't know about?
This percentage is used in calculating the astrodynes.
And so how did y'all determine that this added a 1/2 benefit? Did you?
I think he determined that through what may have been previous astrological writers, plus looking at hundreds or thousands of charts, and decided to give it a specific value. We have greater benefics and lesser benefics. We have greater malefics and lesser malefics. So the greaters are 1/2 and the lessers are 1/4. All right, the second requisite for judging any horoscope is to know the tone quality of each sign and planet in the chart. The nature and tone quality of each of the 12 signs is fully explained in Chapter 2, Serial Lesson 46, Course 2, Astrological Signatures. This tone quality of a sign influences each planet found in the sign in a somewhat different manner. This is due to the particular planetary tone and the characteristic resonance of the sign. Just a couple more quotes and we will move on to practicing this. Something else I wanted you to know was the zodiacal signs act as sounding boards or instruments from which the planetary vibrations reach Earth. Each is a definite section of the astromagnetic field of force which surrounds the Sun. Due to this definite position in a field of force, the tension of astral substance through which the vibrations of the planet must travel is different in each sign, and varies to a less extent even in the different decanates of the same sign. This property of the astral substance of a sign may make it a harmonious sounding board for transmitting the vibrations of some of the planets, but a discordant sounding board for transmitting the vibrations of other planets. It has experimentally been determined that a planet not only sets up vibrations in the sign it occupies, but also in certain other signs. These special signs are so sympathetically tuned to the planet that they vibrate to it no matter where it is located. They are keyed to the tone of the planet and respond to its vibrations, much as a musical instrument keyed to a particular tone will respond to that tone when struck on another instrument, even if the other instrument is at a distance.
That's like harmonics as well, right? How when you play a certain tone, you can hear an overtone that's related.
You know, I've never studied music, so I wouldn't know what you're talking about.
Okay.
You know, I used to play in the school band, right? And quite often I would end up on the bass drum. Well, a lot of times I would put my hand on the bass drum and feel that every time somebody else played their instrument, even if it was something as light as a flute, I would be able to feel the vibrations through the drum. And if you would put your ear next to it, you could hear it as well.
An
Oh, wow.
excellent example.
That is excellent.
Thank you. All right. Let's talk about essential dignities. This is a long quote. By his general knowledge of the nature of each planet in each sign, the student becomes able approximately to determine the harmony or discord of a planet in any sign. For as a rule, a planet is harmonious in a sign the nature of which is similar to its own, and discordant in a sign having dissimilar characteristics. But as this has been experimentally ascertained by others, it is well to memorize the signs in which each planet has its home, exaltation, harmony, and also its degree of exaltation. From these, the detriment, fall, inharmony, and degree of fall can be ascertained by using the opposite factor in the zodiac. This harmony or discord of a planet, due to being able to express its own true nature by occupying a sign or a degree which forms a favorable or unfavorable sounding board for transmitting its vibrations, is called the planet's essential dignity. The table on page 2 gives the essential dignities of the planets and should well be memorized. In case this graph is too small, there were second handouts, which I enlarged it for you. I don't know if I made enough of these for the class, because it's a little bit larger tonight than it was last week. If anyone's missing that, I'll give you my copy at the end of class. That is called a table of essential dignities. It is every astrologer's friend until you've memorized it. So let's talk about one of these qualities. And that is planets at home. This is what the table looks like. Most of you have one. And if not, you have one in a really teeny tiny format. And if you brought a magnifying glass, you can see it. That's what it looks like. I may go back to that. Or actually, I'm going to use this. Back to the chart, how to read it. This is the planets, the Sun through Pluto, the home signs. The sign of the detriment is the sign opposite the home. The exaltation and the degree of exaltation, what specific degree in that sign is considered particularly favorable in the chart. Then you have the fall, which is the sign opposite exaltation. You have the degree of fall. There is what's called the harmony and the inharmony. I'm going to break this down for you in terms of what each of those means. Basically, home rule is the easiest thing for most beginning astrologers to remember. Because one of the things we learn first is that each sign of the zodiac has one or more planetary rulers, and each planet governs one or more sign. I like to look at it similar to a chessboard or to a royal court. Whereas when you're looking at the signs of the zodiac, you've got the king and queen. Leo, the king, Cancer, the queen. Leo ruled by the sun, Cancer ruled by the moon. If you start moving out from them, much like on a chessboard, you will see flanking them, which is the court on either side. After that, if you look at Leo, Cancer and Leo, on either side of those two signs, you have a sign ruled by Mercury. You have Gemini on the other side of Cancer, you have Virgo on the other side of Leo. Next in line at court is Venus. So next to Virgo, you have Libra, and on the opposite end, next to Gemini, you have Taurus, if you can picture it that way. So we're going out on this chessboard. They're matching. After that, we have Mars. So next to Libra, we have Scorpio, and next to Taurus, we have Aries. Then we go to the Jupiter signs. And you have either Sagittarius, which is after Scorpio, or going around the other direction, you have Pisces, which comes before Aries. And lastly is Saturn. And the Saturn signs flank one another because to one side of Sagittarius you have Capricorn, to the other side of Pisces you have Aquarius, which were both traditionally ruled by. So that gives you a sense of the home signs. It's like a royal court, or it's like a chessboard. And if you can remember that, you will know that the sun rules Leo, the moon is at home in Cancer, Mercury is at home in both Gemini and Virgo, Venus at home in Taurus and Libra, Mars is at home in Aries and Scorpio, Jupiter in Sagittarius and Pisces, Saturn is in Capricorn and Aquarius. Well, since the 1760s or so, we started getting additional planets. Uranus, which became the home ruler of Aquarius, which it rules jointly with Saturn. Neptune, which became the chief ruler of Pisces, which it co-rules with Jupiter. And Pluto, which became the upper octave expression of the moon, which it co-rules with Mars, ruling Scorpio. Those are the home signs. I'll bet most all of you know these. This is something you'll be familiar with. Well, now we want to read what he says here. What are planets at home? These signs that persistently transmit the vibrations of a given planet, whether or not the planet is in them, are said to be ruled by that planet. When the planet is in one of them, in one of these signs it rules, it is said to be at home. How do we feel when we're at home?
Comfortable.
Hopefully you feel comfortable. If not, you might consider moving or kicking some of your family members out. All right, the sign that a planet rules transmits easily the constructive characteristics of the planet when the planet is in it. A planet at home thus gains the harmony given to neutral planets when in a succeeded house and making the perfect semi-sextile. That is just a way of measuring, and this is again used in calculating astrodynes. This is added into the mathematical formula. So, when planets are opposite their home sign, we call this their detriment. It's like visiting unpleasant in-laws, if your in-laws are unpleasant. How do you feel in that home?
So,
Uncomfortable.
Yeah, uncomfortable. You know, there are some cultures which don't think it's a good idea to, you know, visit one's in-laws. So,
Can you blame them?
yes,
so but what I'm trying to get to with the detriment, I mean, let's look at the moon in Capricorn, right off the bat. The
okay.
moon's supposed to be nurturing.
We're actually going to look at all of these.
Oh, okay, but it's like, so it's got to function your entire life in this discordant situation. So how does the planet deal with it? Do you know what I mean? How does the planet get to do its thing at all?
It does its thing, but it's the individual that has to deal with it. Believing that we all have free will, we can work on tackling, we can work on first recognizing what the problems are, and then trying to do something about it. And also trying to bring it to its best expression.
Right.
But the sun rules Leo, which is the sign of authority. What happens in Aquarius? Aquarians are naturally authority oppositional. They're opposite. So Aquarians want to argue every point, and they don't recognize your authority until you've proven that you can, you know, be worthy of that. So the sun in Aquarius, it brings out, rather than this gracious, ruling quality that we expect from a good leader, it's the person who's always trying to kick the stool out from underneath the leader.
Rebel rouser.
It is a rabble rouser. It is the rebel of the zodiac. Can you see how that's a detriment? It's not the finest qualities being expressed. The moon in Capricorn. When the moon is in its home sign of Cancer, it's tender, it's nurturing, it's feeling. Capricorn is a dry, barren, calculating, and cold sign. When the moon is in Capricorn, these people tend to become fairly detached.
Did they bury their emotions?
They bury their emotions. Why? What's Capricorn concerned with? What will the neighbors think?
What's
You know,
useful, too, and practical.
Right, what's
Right.
useful? And
Right.
having a breakdown right now is
Right.
not all that
Being
practical.
emotional is not very useful.
However, who might you want as your emergency worker?
Yeah.
Chances are it might be the person with the moon in Capricorn that can put that in check while they're dealing with the earthquake survivors, and then a couple months later go have a meltdown. So, but being married to that person, you might worry that they might be the one that holds the pillow over your head. You should have died 6 months ago.
Don't marry Capricorn.
You know, the angel of death.
My son has that, so I guess I'd have to watch him.
Yeah, hide the pillows.
Need a bodyguard?
Yeah, you might have to hire
The
the
thing
bot.
about a Capricorn moon that I remember hearing was that when a person quits being useful to them, they can jettison them.
There's a reason we have circular files.
That's true.
Yeah.
I'm in Capricorn.
All right, we're going to move along just because of time. Mercury. We know Mercury's at home in chatty Gemini and analytical Virgo. But when you put it in its opposite signs, which are Jupiter signs, Sagittarius, expansive and philosophic, and in Pisces, you get two different results. Mercury in Sagittarius, you get open mouth, insert foot. They just blurt things out impulsively without actually thinking of what the ultimate effect. They're thinking about what they want to say, but they're not thinking about how that arrow might pierce somebody else's armor. And then with Pisces, Mercury in Pisces is prone to anxiety because in that emotional sign, they tend to worry about things. So, yeah, they just, you know, they may not have any problems, but they know someone who does, and it's keeping them up at night. And if they can't remember who does, they might watch the news before going to bed, and that'll keep them up. Venus. Venus is at home in Taurus, where she gets to be sensual and sort of attract in wealth, but is respected. And Venus in Libra tends to be very affable, gets along with everyone, is gracious, and has manners. Well, if you move her to her opposite signs, she gets a little slutty.
Wait, what?
Slutty.
Yeah. That may not be a term they use in high school anymore, but
No, it
in the
is.
good old days, when Venus is in Aries, she throws caution to the wind. I think it was Nancy Reagan that told us to just say no, but Venus in Aries just doesn't. And the same with Venus in Scorpio. The sensuality and sexuality is just seeking to express itself, that it loses discretion or discernment or the ability to judge whether, you know. So what if it's my best friend's wife? You know?
Push the taboos.
Yes. Now Mars, we know, is at home in Aries, the sign of aggressiveness, assertiveness, competition, and in Scorpio. However, when you take them to the opposite signs, which are the ones ruled by Venus, when you put Mars in Taurus, I always think of the Arthurian legend of the sword and the stone. You know, that Mars energy is in such a fixed environment that it cannot easily move to action. And the reason we need Mars is because when somebody's swinging at us, we need to know to duck. Now, or vice versa, where one has to fend off before, you know, first aggression. Now, Mars in Libra, again, you're putting the god of war, you're putting basically the military officer at the peace conference. What is all of their training geared towards? Yes. So, it's not the person you send to the peace accord. So that's how a detriment works for a planet. It's not at home. It's like it's visiting its in-laws and going, these people are crazy.
I have to say that I have a Capricorn moon at 26 degrees. It's a very, you know, any way you do it, it's Capricorn.
We gathered that from your consternation
Right,
earlier.
about that moon. But it's interesting because it is a practical moon, and the only thing that pleases me if you go on a date is you go eat. I mean, you do that. And then the second thing
It continues to the support of
right,
life systems.
it's proof of love is if you'll go get my oil changed. It has nothing to do with bringing me love. I remember if somebody says, I'll change your oil for you in your car, I think the guy must be in love with me. Which is strange. But yeah, that's one of the ways.
No, that is Capricorn.
I have a Taurus
You know?
moon, and I love it when the guy sharpens all my knives.
Exactly. It's something that counts, you know.
Yeah, you don't see too many Pennzoil ads for Valentine's, though. Okay, on to Jupiter.
You gave me food, you must love me.
Think of Jupiter as being religious, expansive, and faith-based, whereas Mercury is cerebral and intellectual and factual. Mercury did not do well in Jupiter's signs. It was not at home there, because it was either speaking its mind without discretion or being anxiety-ridden. The same for Jupiter. When Jupiter is placed in Mercury signs, it doesn't express well, because the natural tendencies for faith which sometimes is blind belief. Faith can be blind belief, or faith can sometimes be based on experience. And when it goes into Gemini, what happens is it tends to undermine its sense of faith. And when it goes into Virgo, in Gemini, the mind is chattering. In Virgo, it wants to look at it through a microscope and to actually see if there are any details for the proof of the existence of the divine. Now, Saturn. Saturn signs, we know the home signs were Capricorn and Aquarius. So opposite that are the homes of the king and queen. Saturn, when it is in Cancer, is a downer. Think of Eeyore from the Pooh. Yeah. All right. I'll do it. So Saturn in Cancer tends to just be kind of pessimistic. And Saturn in Leo, on the other hand, can become tyrannical. Because in the sign of Leo, it wants the rules, and it wants the rules to be followed. And you will follow the rules.
What if you don't?
You're in trouble.
Sarah and Leo also be the person's kind of insecure.
Yes, but they might make up for it with bravado. The person who's, at the bar telling the big stories and doing that sort of thing. It's the person that puts on a big show, but it's really covering up their insecurities. Uranus in Leo is much like the sun in Aquarius. You have this conflict between the rebel and authority. So Uranus in Leo just wants to break with all of the rules. And it wants everyone else to break with the rules because it's so much more fun. Neptune, which think of Neptune as the planet of imagination and intuition and fantasy. You put it in factual Virgo, which wants to analyze and, so that's your dream. You want to open a McDonald's, and let me tell you how that's not going to happen. Neptune in Virgo is like popping a bubble.
The Great Depression, I think, produced a generation of Neptune and Virgo, anxious, fear-based, couldn't, expand into the...
In other words, my parents.
Yes, all of our parents. Or many of us, sorry. But Neptune and Virgo was that generation that lived
I'm
through.
pretty sure we're out of
It
it.
was so impacted by...
Because I've always thought that Virgo wanted to control every little piece of thing, and so that inability to control would Neptune.
Dad's old, but
I have Virgo and Virgo.
Virgo can be nitpicky. Right.
Pluto in Taurus, I still continue to try and figure it out. Other than it is opposite of its home. But I think Pluto in Taurus tends towards the extremisms of materialism. If you think of the I have, Pluto in Taurus is... I win. It's like Monopoly. It's truly think of Monopoly. Pluto in Taurus is Monopoly.
Think of a plutocracy.
A plutocracy, yeah. All of the wealth is held in the hands of a very few individuals. So that's planets in detriment. Now, planets in exaltation. We've talked about planets in home. Planets in exaltation is similar to that. Zane says, the most refined influence exerted by a planet, however, is not when it is at home, but when in another sign, which not only permits it to express its energy fully, but which, due to the peculiar quality of its astral substance, lends itself particularly to the expression of the finer and more intense vibrations of the planetary tone. This other sign, which only transmits the planet's vibration strongly when the planet is in it, yet which lends itself singularly to the highest expression of the planet's qualities, is called the planet's exaltation. A planet in exaltation thus gains one half the harmony given neutral planets when in a succeedent house and making the perfect sextile. Well, to put it in simple terms, think of the sign of exaltation as being your best friend's home. That this is the place where you go and you have the most fun, where you have the best time.
Feel better than when you're at home alone.
When you feel better. Yes.
First in the house, hey, sloppy.
So, for the sun, that happens in the sign of Aries. Yeah, the sun gets to express its qualities of power, leadership, authority, best in Aries. The moon does it best in Taurus. The moon, when in Taurus, think of it as the fertile seed in fecund ground that's just ready to bring forth flower. So this is, an incredibly fertile place for the moon.
I just had a question about this. If like moon in Taurus has all that, if your moon isn't in Taurus, but it's in the house, say it's in the second house, which is ruled by Taurus, does it give any effect?
Well, it gives an effect, and there are some people that call it an accidental dignity, but it doesn't give it this effect.
This is much stronger.
Right. Now, Mercury, which is bright, mental, curious, and intellectual, you put it in the sign of knowledge, Aquarius. I know. Mercury there wants to learn everything, and it gives for a very sharp, perceptive mind that can combine a lot of different information and draw from different disciplines and bring them together into hybrids. Venus, the planet of love and affection, you place it in Pisces, the twin fish, which are the symbol of soulmates. This incredible sign of empathy. So Venus there is able to resonate with love in that sign, and some of the finest love. Mars, curiously enough, expresses best in Capricorn. Why? What are the problems with Mars? I call it impulse control. Why are most people who are in jail in jail?
Because they're awesome.
The prisons are filled with people who have poor impulse control. And so when Mars is in Capricorn, it learns to discipline its impulses. Mars is exalted in Capricorn because in that sign, it's concerned with construction rather than destruction. All right. Jupiter in the sign of Cancer. So Jupiter's benevolence, when it's placed in the sign of Cancer, expresses a true generosity where it wants to care and nurture and take care of everyone around them. This is the lottery winner that, buys an apartment building so they can put all their family members in it and know that they at least have shelter for the rest of their lives. The Saturn, which, if we think about Saturn as the judge, in the sign of Libra, which has to do with equality and fairness, When Saturn's in that sign, his normal tendencies towards self-centeredness and selfishness do not express because his concerns are for the other. Uranus, the planet of originality, expresses best in the I think atmosphere created by Gemini. It's allowed to come up with bright ideas and to express them. It's like being in a think tank. Neptune, which is the planet of imagination and spiritual idealism, does best when it's in the sign of philosophy and the higher mind. And Pluto, the planet of cooperation, does best in the sign of Leo, where it is able to garner cooperation from those in power and thereby be able to create positive or permanent change. Well, what happens when they're opposite? It's kind of like going to the house of your worst friend. So, what happens, Zane says, when a planet is in the sign opposite its exaltation, which is called its fall, what happens when we fall? Go boom, hurt yourself, yeah. So, it gains the discord given a neutral planet in a cadent house and making the perfect semi-square. That will only make sense to those of you who are more advanced astrologers, but it's a way of measuring what is the power of this discord. So, the sun is exalted in Aries, where it's able to have leadership. What happens in Libra is it becomes so concerned of what does everyone else think. It doesn't take its sense of control or its sense of confidence. It's looking for the good housekeeping seal of approval, if they still give that out.
Does it make it indecisive, sort of? You know, I always think of the sun being focused, and then if you're trying to balance everything, sometimes you can't figure it out.
Right. If you try to please everyone, what happens? Usually no one gets pleased, or maybe one person does, and it's not you. The moon in the sign of Scorpio, not good. The moon is our emotions, and what happens in Scorpio is it definitely goes into its dark place. I call this, I always describe this as putting poison in your own coffee, hoping the other person will die.
Sounds terrifying.
Yeah, when the moon is in Scorpio, it tends to seethe over things. You know, it's always mulling things over and getting worked up emotionally, and is looking for someone to blame and hopefully to humiliate publicly. Mercury doesn't do so well in the sign of Leo. And because here, when Mercury's in Leo, the ideas are less original, as it might be in Aquarius, the sign of its exaltation. Mercury in Leo tends to want to just parrot what has been heard from the authorities. It's, in a sense, much like academic or religious orthodoxies, where people are just saying, you know, this is the way we've always done it. We're going to toe the party line. Venus, well, we know she was a little slutty in Aries and Scorpio. What happens in Virgo? She's very proper. That's the word.
She's a Catholic schoolgirl.
Well, not the ones I knew.
Exactly. On one side, they seem to be very prudish and such, and on the other side, they're complete sluts.
Yeah, don't let those plaid skirts fool you. Because as soon as they're off campus, they start rolling up the waistband to show their knees. All right, Mars. Think of Mars in Cancer like the blacksmith taking a red hot iron and sticking it in a bucket of water. What happens? Psst, nothing. Yes, the energy dissipates. So when Mars is in Cancer, the energies fizzle out. The passion of Mars can't really, it can't, if you think about the heat of a hot iron, radiates its heat outward and touches other things. So inspiration or passion, when we're excited about something, we can usually affect the environment. But when it's in Cancer, what happens is the environment causes it to fizzle out. Now, Jupiter in Capricorn. This is putting the planet of faith in the sign of orthodoxy and tradition. So we all know what happens with that. We get a lot of rules and a lot of thou shalt not. Thank you. So Jupiter in Capricorn can be fundamentalism in any faith, whether it's Christian, whether it's Islamic, whatever you name.
Either way, nobody likes you if you're a fundamentalist.
All right, Saturn in Aries. This is, it's kind of like cutting the brake fluid. Saturn in Aries, because Saturn's the brakes. Saturn's that safety mechanism that keeps you from getting into an accident. And when Saturn's in Aries, it's like having cut that. There are no brakes on this car. It's like a runaway train.
I always think of to me, a lead balloon trying to jump. When Aries was to go somewhere, it's not going to get off.
And that could be another image, is this inability to get off the ground. You have to find, a lighter fabric to make your airplane wings with other than lead. Uranus in the sign of Sagittarius. Uranus is the rebel, and when you put it in the sign of public expression, it is the rabble-rouser. This is the person that wants change just for the sake of change, and it foments revolution and the like, or wacky new cults. Neptune doesn't do so well in Gemini. Here again, the powers of the imagination are being forced into giving, clear verbal instructions. It loses its ambiguity or the ability to fantasize. And Pluto in Aquarius, this is at its fall. What happens with Pluto in Aquarius is mob mentality. It's trying to get everyone in the group to behave the same. It's mob mentality or herd mentality. We have more, and we have 20 more minutes. Let's see if we can get through it all, because I really want to look at some charts. All right, in harmony. When a planet is in the sign opposites its harmony. All right. There is also another sign in which a planet gains a little harmony, but only 1/2 as much as when at home. This sign is called its harmony. A planet in the sign of its harmony thus gains 1/2 the harmony given a neutral planet when in a succedent house and making the perfect semi-sextile. That's the mathematical equation, but what it looks like is planets in harmony are a sign where they have pleasant, favorable expression. It may not be as powerful as when they're at home or when they're in their exaltation, but, it's another nice place to visit. It's kind of like maybe going to the gym or something, someplace where you get to go and play and have fun.
I don't like
the playground, or then let's say the playground.
Comic-Con.
So, the sun is at its harmony in Sagittarius. If you think about it, the sun governs the power urges. It is at home in Leo and exalted in Aries. Well, those are of the 3 fire signs, we might say that those are the 2 most power hungry of the 3 fire signs. In Sagittarius, the sun can either, if it senses a vacuum of power, it'll step in and take control. Or if it senses that somebody else has greater authority than it will defer to the person with greater knowledge, skills, or abilities. So that's the quality of the sun in Sagittarius. The moon, when it's in Pisces, if we think of the moon as being sensitive and intuitive and impressionable, well, it does really well in Taurus, which is that fixed earth, that fertile, deep, dense, dark earth. It does well in its home sign of Cancer, where it can be nesting and nurturing and family-oriented. And in Pisces, it's able to be more imaginative, intuitive, and impressionable. Mercury, when it's in the sign of Scorpio, has retention mentally. What do they say? An elephant never forgets? That's what Mercury in Scorpio is like. It can remember the details.
Vengefulness.
Hopefully you haven't hurt them. Now, Venus is at harmony in Aquarius. Why? She can be friendly to everyone when she's in Aquarius. Now, there's a downside to that. People with Venus in Aquarius, it's really hard for them to let somebody else know that they're interested. Why? Because they feel like they have to treat everyone sort of as pals the same way. Mars does well in Leo because, again, his nature, which is to be combative or competitive or passionate, does well in the sign of sports and lovemaking. Jupiter in Taurus, primarily because Jupiter in that sign can build permanent wealth. And permanent weight. Saturn, it does well in Virgo because Saturn's need to run the accounting spreadsheet on everything is welcome to do that in the sign of Virgo. Here, I have another ledger. Uranus in the sign of Libra. The need of Uranus to have new ideas does well in Libra, which is the sign of design and fashion, and all of those things where trends are being set very quickly. Neptune in the sign of Cancer, because Cancer is, again, a watery, intuitive, impressionable sign. And Pluto in the sign of Aries, because the desires for cooperation in Aries, he can get other people inspired to get on board. Now, every planet also has its inharmony. So when a planet is in the sign opposite its harmony, which is called its inharmony, it thus gains 1/4 the discord given to neutral planets when in succedent houses and making the perfect semi-square. So planets in their inharmony are mild irritants. What happens when the sun is in the sign of Gemini? It has a hard time there, and it tends to express in the way of being very changeable, much like in Libra. It has trouble making up its own mind. It has trouble expressing its sense of authority or power. When the moon is in Virgo, kind of like the moon in Capricorn, only a little more mild. It's a little less ruthless. But the moon in in Virgo can just be nitpicky, splitting hairs. Mercury in Taurus, one's ideas or thinking become rigid. Venus in Leo thinks that one should go out in the street wearing gaudy showgirl costumes. Or plaid pants and a polka dot shirt. It loses its fashion propriety.
Sounds like a couple people I know.
Okay. Mars in Aquarius wants to pick a fight with everyone. You say tomato, I say tomato, and the fight is on. Jupiter in Scorpio. This is a hard place for the religious urges. It can lead towards abuse and sometimes pettiness. Usually we think of Jupiter as being expansive and generous. But when it's in Scorpio, it has a harder time loosening the purse strings, or it gives with the concern of, what am I going to get from this? Is there something coming back to me? Will I at least get a break on my taxes? Saturn in Pisces is like digging a pit and falling in it. You get depressed and you just have a hard time pulling yourself out of there. Uranus in Aries is basically, these are the garage bomb makers. Though that's not true, because these outer planets are there for a long time. But it's that type of mentality. They're looking to blow something up. What's that? Okay.
Is that not where Uranus is right now?
It is. And what's been going on around the world? I mean, if we look at just the Middle East alone, in the last year, since Uranus went into Aries, it has been the hotbed of revolution. Armed revolution as well as armed oppression.
Squaring Pluto and Capricorn.
Yeah, and Pluto's Neptune in Capricorn. Here is this Neptune in Capricorn is like sending, this imaginative fantasy child to all-girls boarding school. And Pluto in Libra will sometimes use its powers to sort of influence others or undermine the stability of things. It doesn't express well there. Now, let's take a few minutes. I'm going to skip over mutual reception just so we can look at some charts tonight. All right, here's a chart. We've got 3 charts to look at tonight. None of these people were born on today's date, but every other class is going to have somebody born on that day. So, Brigitte Bardot, she has Saturn at home in the sign of Aquarius, in her 2nd house. So the safety urges are in a sign that can be either revolutionary or traditional, because Saturn's ruled by Aquarius is ruled by both Saturn and Uranus. And this is going to impact her in regards to her attitudes towards finances. The detriment is Neptune in Virgo, and that's a whole generation of people born in the 20s, 30s, and into the 40s that have Neptune in Virgo. So here we can see that the powers of imagination are possibly being somewhat suppressed. What certainly happened during those years, if we think of Virgo as being our food supply, Neptune in Virgo was the time when we started putting a lot of additives into foods, and processed foods and packaged foods really started in the 20s, 30s, 40s.
Some of that's very shady.
Planets in their fall. She has the Sun in Libra, which makes one needy of the approval of others. And Venus is in Virgo, so we may not know the real story about this woman's sex appeal. I mean, with Venus in Virgo, she may have been much more private or much more prudish than her publicist wanted the world to think. Because certainly in her days, back in the 50s, she was a real sex symbol. In the late 50s, early 60s. The harmony is her sun is in the, Mars is in the sign of Leo, which we can find here. And the thing is, what many people don't know about her is she's very much a philanthropist. Now, probably most of you have not heard her name in 40 years.
At all.
Or, in the case of the younger generation, who the heck is she? But this was a very famous French film star of the late 50s, 60s, into the 70s. In the 70s, she went underground and has basically barely been heard of since, except for, incidents around animal rights.
Is she still alive?
She just recently was in the news because she was going to give up her citizenship in France because of...
They eat horses, or...
Well, yeah, something to that... I can't remember specifically, but yes, she's very...
She's behind getting rid of the furs.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and that's the Mars in Leo, which can be that type of advocacy in the house of other people's money, funding or backing or being an advocate for causes of some kind.
It's interesting looking at the Venus in Virgo. Her beauty was very refined and chiseled and sort of a sublime, elegant, carved quality, wasn't it? I mean, it didn't have...
You're asking me to go back into the very deepest recesses of my mind.
Yeah, she could have, but she had this, Virgo and kind of exquisite beauty about her.
Yeah, refined beauty.
Can't Venus and Virgo, isn't that... Some prostitutes have that where they're really good with techniques?
Yeah, there you go. It can be very earthy and sensual.
Well,
Virgo is an
techniques,
earth
so you know
sign.
how to put on putting together that which would be thought of as really sexy, despite her, prudishness.
Yeah, but it's in the third decadent, so it has Taurus.
Good, yeah, good,
Right.
because that makes it kind of
Instead
sensual.
of Taurus, see, I have,
And she can kind of
and she was
smooth
showing
that.
what she would have, what
Yeah.
she had,
Oh,
all her assets,
yeah.
So,
Well,
Oh, let's hear it for assets.
oh yes.
her personal
Yes.
assets.
Sun in Virgo, doesn't it? Sun in
Libra.
ninth house. Does that mean that you're shy? A very shy person?
Not necessarily, because the ninth house is the house of public speaking,
Yeah,
teaching, presentations, publicity.
but it can be, can it?
Well,
The sun tends to be weak when it's in the ninth house because it's a cadent house. But generally, these are people who put themselves out in front of the camera or at the podium.
But it's conjunct to midheaven, so.
Right.
It's very visible.
By 7 degrees, let's see. Yeah. 9 degrees. Yeah, maybe.
It's
I'm
right
trying to
on the
think.
equator.
I
Yeah.
It might be 10 degrees for a luminary in a cadent house. I think that might be the extremes. So I'd have to, let me look at the chart and see.
Uh-oh, Uranus in the 4th house? They're not like us. That's what that means, they're not like us.
The aliens.
You have to make an
Now the sun is conjunct the midheaven, just barely.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if we could actually, we've got 5 minutes and 2 more charts.
Oh, yeah.
It should be, all be okay if we just move on?
Yeah.
All right, Willie Nelson. Now this guy's always in the news. Again, sun conjunct the midheaven, interestingly enough. So both of these figures are outstanding public figures. The only difference is Brigitte Bardot went underground except for her activism. Willie has activism too of his own, isn't
In the
it?
agricultural area.
In the agricultural fields, right. And I think he's been arrested for certain agricultural byproducts. So, if we look at planets in home, we've got the moon in Cancer. He must love his friends and collect friends around him as though they were family. Venus is in Taurus. In the Venus at home in the sign of music, Taurus. In the house of career, the voice. And we have Saturn in Aquarius, its home sign, which is over here. And didn't Brigitte have that? Well, they're the same generation. I think
Must be nice.
yeah, he's born a year before her. So they're the same generation. So Saturn's in Aquarius here, and this could be, I mean, normally we think of Saturn at home in Aquarius. It's able to organize. Though what I do know about this man is he's gotten in trouble for his employees. You know, apparently his accountant wasn't filing taxes.
That's kind of ironic.
That's where it sounds.
They had a benefit concert to raise money for.
Yeah, they had to do to make the money back to pay his taxes. I'm sure he had to sell 5 or 6 of his houses to do that as well.
He's got it back.
Okay, he's got it back. All right. Detriment, Jupiter in Virgo. Well, we can see where the tax problem comes. Jupiter rules Pisces, and it falls in Virgo in his 2nd house. Somebody wasn't doing their accounting. And Neptune's in Virgo, also at its detriment, only here in the
And retrograde.
first
All those
house.
planets are retrograde.
Mars conjunct Neptune in the 1st house.
Their temper.
Possibly a stoner.
Willie Nelson.
I think Mars and Neptune conjunct, always, they're bigger than life. Do you know what I mean? They look great on the stage, you bring them down, they can't talk, you know, but it's this.
Yeah, give them a proscenium and they can shine. Give them an audience. In harmony, Uranus in Aries. And yeah, it makes for a little bit of a rabble-rouser, a rebel, somebody who can be authority defiant. And we didn't do mutual reception, so I'm going to skip that. So we can go to the next chart, which is Jodie Foster. A little bit younger than these others, so some of you will know her based on going to the movies.
Yeah, I actually know her.
Yay!
Yeah, she's that old lady in the films.
Right. But I bet you if you asked any of my peers, they wouldn't.
Okay, Well, you have a wider palette of cinematic experience here. Home, Jupiter in Pisces, Saturn in Aquarius. How did that happen? Well, she's 28 years younger than Willie and Brigitte. She could have been their love child. So, where do we have it? Here, Saturn is in Aquarius in her second house. She's probably not only been able to make money, but hold on to it. Jupiter is in Pisces in the third house, which would normally make for harmonious relationships with siblings, though curiously, it opposes the moon in her chart, and she has a sister or a half-sister that was publicly making, unusual claims about Jodie Foster.
Well, she just came out recently.
Okay,
Jodie did.
well, her sister outed her years or decades in advance.
For
So,
what?
being a lesbian.
Well, 5th, 6th, and 7th house, aren't they?
The moon and Jupiter kind of have
Yeah.
protection.
So what? Now, Venus in Scorpio. Who knows? Yeah, and conjunct Neptune. So maybe she has some wild friends.
And fantasizes about women.
Well, Venus, Neptune too is kind of goddess energy to me. They're kind of unapproachable.
That's good.
You know? Like the thing you want but can't quite get.
Interesting.
All right, harmony. Mercury in Scorpio, so a very retentive mind. Look at all that Scorpio, 4 planets in Scorpio. Even though she may have come out herself, she's probably still not speaking to her sister. Because Scorpios, they may forgive, but they never forget.
They forgive?
They may forgive. That's what I said. All right. And Mars is in Leo. And I believe she's involved in different advocacies too, but I can't remember what they are. And that's Mars in Leo in her house of other people's money. And then the in harmony is the moon in Virgo in her chart. What's that?
We're not looking at conjunctions, but
No, but it is.
that's a changeable moon.
Yeah. So we're now at the end of class. It's 8:32, so we got to bring this to a close. But that's, looking at planets as they fall in signs really influences their interpretation. And I would say we'll apply this in future classes now that we have this as a key to work with. Again, always bring your handouts from one class back. Read this second handout because it gives it to you all in detail how that works. And I've also included a chart form. I actually think since most students nowadays, we work with computers to calculate charts and you don't have to do the math yourself, it still helps to actually look at a computer-generated chart and actually write in your house cusp, place your planets in the houses in the sign and degree. If you even write in your aspects, it's just a great way of introducing information to your mind about your chart that you might not otherwise look at. So that's why that's included. All right. I will see you next week. Thank you.